Thanks so much, DG. You forgot your mask here, but I know you have sufficient supply to take you through the day. Thank you for that presentation. We are now going to cross over to Cape Town, where we're going to find Hugh Amor, who the minister has already referred to, is the chairperson of the NITT, which is the National Investigations Task Team. There's NEIC and then there's NITT. So these acronyms are quite interesting. All right, let's go through to him. Let me see if he's available on the screen. Good afternoon, Hugh. If you can hear me, please respond so we can proceed with your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Elijah. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great stuff. We also have Advocate Luvuyo Bono, who is going to start. He will make a few remarks and then hand over to you. The advocate is the chairperson of the NEIC, the National Examinations Irregularities Committee, and he's going to make a few remarks, and thereafter the presentation will come from you. So Advocate Bono is in PE, and Hugh is in Cape Town. So from Pretoria, I hand over to PE. Advocate, please unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Mhlanga. And good afternoon to the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the DG, and members of the media. As the South African public is quite aware that there were some leaks on the matric exams that took place, and as the National Irregularities Committee, we then subjected the matter to an investigation, which was led by Hugh, the NITT, and Hugh will give you a detailed report on what came out, but from just in brief from the investigation, which looked at, amongst other things, investigative marking, verification, as well as a statistical analysis of the marks. The report, which you are going to be taken through, was brought to us as the NEIC, and we looked at it, and we looked at the findings, particularly around the fact that what appeared from the investigation was that the candidates had in fact shown that they had done the work individually, and that there was no evidence of collusion, and that the leaks had really came out or spread through a WhatsApp message. And based on the evidence that had been collected through the investigation, a recommendation on the basis that the 2020 combined exams were not compromised, which we accepted and we are happy with, and presented to the department at large, both at HEDCOM and CM level, to support the fact that we are quite happy with the report and the outcome thereof. But as I have indicated, Hugh Amor, who was the head of the investigation, will then take you through the report in detail, and I'm sure you'd be given an opportunity to ask questions. Thank you, Mr. Mhlanga. Mr. Amor, over to you.
Thank you. Elijah, are you going to flood the presentation?
Yes, I will. Trying to get the presentation as we speak.
While he's doing that, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, and members of the media, the purpose of this briefing is to present the conclusions of the task team, and those conclusions in brief are that given that the spread of the leaked questions was done via WhatsApp, it is a fact that the full extent of the leaks may never be revealed. But based on the available evidence we have at the moment, from the investigative marking, from interviews and the statistical analysis, widespread leaks did not occur. Elijah, would you like me to try?
Yeah, we can proceed. We are projecting the presentation. I hope you can see it.
I can't see it, but if you tell me which slide we're on.
We are on purpose.
Okay. The purpose I've just explained, and I want to go on from there to the introduction. And the point that I think needs to be made here is that the National Senior Certificate is a flagship qualification. It's critical at the exit from schooling at grade 12, and therefore it's critical that its integrity and credibility is maintained. And I think we need to make the point that despite the very successful administration of the combined 2020 examinations for the NSC and the Senior Certificate amended, and I think it's worth just pausing to note that took place for over 1 million candidates for the first time, because the June candidates were added to the November candidates, and it took place, as I don't need to remind anybody, in the context of COVID. So we had a very successful administration of the exams, but it needs to be accepted that the examination was marred by the leaks of Mathematics Paper 2 and Physical Sciences Paper 2 question papers. What I want to try to show is that our investigation, which was to establish the extent of the leaks, to determine the source of the security breach or breaches, to identify those individual candidates who had prior access to a leaked question paper or papers, to make recommendations on the credibility of the examination in the country as a whole, and to work with the provincial examination irregularities committees. We have PEICs as well as the NEIC, to work with the PEICs in all provinces to ensure that investigations and hearings are conducted with regard to individual learners against whom there is an allegation of wrongdoing, and at the same time to ensure that there's no duplication in the responsibilities relating to this investigation and the state security agencies. And then it was critical for our task team to make recommendations in order to adopt statistical analysis of the raw marks, interviews with candidates, and two investigations conducted by third-party organizations. First, a private investigator to look at some IT forensic investigation on behalf of the task team, and secondly, the investigation to establish the source, first of all by audit by the DBE staff, and secondly by the Directorate for Priority Crimes Investigations, often referred to popularly as the Hawks. Now, what leaked and what was done? And I think that this is the beginning of what one needs to understand about this process. Well, the first reports on a suspect led to two sources of information. First of all, from a printer contracted by one province who has been arrested, who has appeared in court, and who has been remanded for further hearing in March, that he had in his possession question papers, including the second mathematics paper, in other words, paper 2 for mathematics. These reports that this person had leaked papers in his possession were too late for the DBE to replace Mathematics Paper 2, but in time for the DBE to replace other key subject question papers under strict security. What that meant was that the original question papers, already printed and distributed to the centres, were replaced at short notice, replaced under conditions of very strict security, eliminating any possible leak which might have been in the distribution chain, and then sent to examination centres. This was an important and effective first mitigation action taken by the department. Establishing the source was obviously the first critical task, and remains the first critical task. And what did it involve? As I said, it involved an audit of the distribution chain. It involves investigation by the DPCI. It involved interviews with candidates and the appointment of a forensic private investigator. Now, as I indicated at the outset, the mode of transmission, which was by social media, was by WhatsApp, makes precise determination of the spread virtually impossible. And a forensic investigator and DPCI processes have not yet been completed. That, though, does not prevent us from reaching the conclusions which we've come to. So what findings did we make? Well, first of all, two findings about the leaks. A leak did occur from one province's contract printers. We know, and it's a matter of public record, that the suspect has been arrested and has appeared in court. The second leak, which we have established, is a paper printed at the Government Printing Works leaked. Now, the Government Printing Works prints for two provinces. The investigation into this leak is in the hands of the DPCI, but we know from a candidate who reported having received a leaked paper that the leaked paper was from one of the Government Printing Works printed papers. So that leak is now being pursued to conclusion by the DPCI. For our present purposes, not for the future, but for our present purposes, what's more important is to find out what happened as a result of those two leaks. What had to be done as well was to check the distribution chain. And here an intensive audit was undertaken by the Department of Basic Education relating to the distribution from points of printing to exam centres for the Mathematics Paper 2 and the Physical Sciences Paper 2. And the intention of this intensive audit was to identify any possible breach in the distribution chain that may have contributed to the leak. This was extensive, and it is a matter of great comfort to the team that the DBE audit team found no indications of any breaches during the storage and distribution of these two question papers. So what do we know about the extent of the leaks? Well, first of all, we have evidence from a number of chat groups where we are able to determine the number of learners in each chat group. The first chat group A had 135 learners. And in this case, we know because we have interviewed the person who sent material to this chat group that what was sent to this chat group was two sub-questions worth 5 marks each. Because he had received the paper, he was unable to answer those two sub-questions, though he could do the rest, and he sent to his chat group those two questions asking for help in solving those problems. This was after 10 p.m. on Sunday the 15th of November for an exam that was to be written first thing on the Monday morning. So late on Sunday night, he was unable to answer these two sub-questions and sent these two sub-questions to the other 134 members of his chat group. We have established in respect of other chat groups to whom a full paper or questions from a full paper were leaked that 101 learners were in those chat groups. That then is a total of 236 candidates for the 2020 NSC to whom mathematics questions or mathematics question papers were sent by way of WhatsApp group. In respect to physical sciences, the numbers are smaller, and the chat groups here total 62 learners. So what do we know about these learners who've had this access? Now, as I've said, there are 236 in mathematics and 62 in physical sciences who were sent screenshots of questions or question papers prior to the writing of paper 2 exams in these subjects. This available evidence is not, and of course cannot be conclusive to the extent of the leak. We can't claim that we have uncovered every single WhatsApp group, though there is further evidence that suggests that we may well have done so. So on this evidence, the leaks were limited to very small numbers. The next step in the investigation was to conduct investigative marking, and this was done countrywide. Investigative marking aims to determine any unusual patterns and particularly to establish whether there's been any collusion at a particular centre in respect of a particular question or a question papers. And for mathematics, where the more intensive investigative marking took place, this involved 116 exam centres and 5,612 candidates. In respect to physical sciences, it involved 17 centres and 473. Now, the findings of this investigative marking, most scripts showed investigative marking. The scores of the WhatsApp group, and I should have mentioned beforehand that that WhatsApp group of 135 learners to whom the one learner sent 2 sub-questions is a talent group identified for particular special coaching because they are high achievers. The scores of the WhatsApp group were high, as expected, and we know that these learners had access. By access, I mean they were sent screenshots of 2 paper 2 questions, question 6.2 and 6.4. We do, of course, and we have looked at what having been sent the screenshots meant, and the evidence is very clear that on the claims of the candidates, and they have been interviewed, on the claims of the candidates, very few of those 134 had opened the WhatsApp message before the exam. And that is understandable. This was sent late on the Sunday night for an exam first thing on the Monday morning. And while some people may be addicted to their cell phones, not all learners are. And what was important is that there was no evidence found through this investigative marking of collusion amongst the candidates. This was subject to verification. This investigative marking was subject to verification by a team from the DBE of people belonging to specific groups, and the headlines from that verification are clear that no evidence was found to suggest that these candidates benefited from prior access, if they had it, to the question paper or sub-questions. The suspect candidates, and what I mean by suspect candidates is those candidates to whom a screenshot was sent. We know that they were sent, and in many cases the candidates concerned claim that they had not opened that post before, and in some cases there is cell phone evidence to prove that. There were specific candidates who presented evidence of performance in the whole of the investigative marking group that need further investigation, but this was not group related, and that investigation is taking place independently because it's not linked to the leaks of these papers. The next important task was to subject the results to statistical analysis. And the purpose of this was to determine whether there was any pattern that indicated unusual performance in Maths Paper 2 or in Physical Sciences Paper 2. Given that the leaks related to these 2 question papers, we were confident that if there had been widespread leaks, it would be apparent through a process of statistical analysis. And what we did in order to try to give us confidence on this, and particularly to confidence in respect of any pattern that we might or might not observe, is that this statistical analysis was done on the results not just of 2020, but on the results of the 4 preceding years, 2016 to 2019. And simply to give you an indication of what the cohort sizes were, and the statistical analysis was confined to the full-time candidates in each of these subjects. You'll see from the chart that the 2020 numbers, though smaller than the highest number in 2016, in both mathematics and in physical science, are of the same order of magnitude. 232,000 full-time candidates for mathematics, compared to a high of 265 in 2016 and a low of 221,000 in 2019. And similarly, in physical science, the number of 173,000 in 2020 was lower than the high of 193,000 in 2015, but higher than the low of 164,000 in 2019. So what did we do in relation to the statistical analysis? The purpose was to try to determine whether there was an unusual pattern in relation to paper 2 results. So what we did is we took the paper 1 and paper 2 raw marks of full-time candidates. We took the difference, in other words, the mark obtained in paper 2 less the mark in paper 1, and that was computed for each candidate for the years 2016 to 2020. And distribution curves of the differences were plotted on the same axes for 2016 to 2020 to see how the different years compared against each other. And what was done here in order to try to establish a statistical pattern was to take a simple linear regression using paper 2 marks less paper 1 marks, computing the standardized residual for each candidate. In other words, the standardized residual from the expected mark that from paper 2 given the performance in paper 1, plot that standardized residual against the candidate's paper 1 marks. And this would highlight any candidates who performed poorly in the paper 1 mark but who achieved an unusually high mark in the paper 2 examination. And we identified all candidates whose standardized residuals were greater than 3 in order that we would look at those that were statistically relevant. I'm going to show next a number of diagrams which show the pattern observed in the 4 years 2016 to 2019 and the pattern observed in 2020, first of all in mathematics and then in physical sciences. So these are the patterns for the 4 years 2016 to 2019. These are the patterns of the distribution, and it will be clear from these patterns that the pattern in the years 2016 to 2019 were very similar in all respects, and you'll see a very similar pattern. So we then needed to look at what the pattern was in 2020 to see if it was significantly different. This then is the pattern in 2020. And as you will see, this shows a very similar pattern, but there is a scattering, not of large numbers, but there is a scattering above value 3 and into the 4 statistical residual number in the 2020 group that is not as obvious in the 4 years. The next slide will show this in more detail and in a way that may be easier to comprehend. Each dot on these represents a candidate in the examination. And you'll see that in each of the 4 years, 2016 to 2019, there were candidates who outperformed against their expectations in paper 2 relative to paper 1. Now, there are many reasons for that, and there may be questions in paper 2 that are easier for some candidates than for others than their paper 1. And it may also be that in some schools, the attention given to paper 2 questions is more focused than the attention given to paper 1 questions. But you will see from this that there are more dots in the Mathematics 2020 area, and that's visually important, visually clear. But let's just look at the next slide, which actually gives us the numbers. The number in 2020 is an outlier. It's 205 against the highest previous number of 66 and a low in 2018 of 27. So what we see is that there is a pattern here. It is a pattern of outperformance of 205 that is not observed to that extent in the patterns of the previous 4 years. The next slide that we wanted to look at was what happened to the 175 full-time candidates in mathematics. Of that 236, the 175 who were sent a question or question paper, what was their performance? Were they in the outlier group or were they not? And on this chart, each black dot represents a candidate to whom a question or question paper was sent prior to the examination. And this shows their paper 2 outperformance in relation to their paper 1 outperformance. What is very clear from this graph is that most of the black dots are where one would expect them. They're around the value 0, but there are only two in the 205 that have a standardized residual of greater than 3. So it would appear from this that to the extent that those 175 learners of the 236 to whom this paper was sent, who are full-time candidates who are doing mathematics, that the actual outperformance is only observed in respect of 2 candidates. For the rest, they performed as they would have been expected to perform given the paper 1 results. So when we compare the annual standardized results, the trend is very much the same, except, of course, as you will have seen in the case of 2020, where there is a higher concentration of outliers beyond a value of 3 and higher. But when I say it's a higher concentration of outliers, that higher concentration is limited to 205 out of 232,000 candidates. As I've said, the black points in that graph represent the 175 full-time candidates who are alleged to have been sent the question paper or parts of the question paper. For shorthand, we've referred to those as the suspects in this report. And the overlap is only 2 candidates. What's also important is to look at the mean standardized residual for this 175, and the mean standardized residual for this group is minus 0.1, a small negative number. And what this means is that suspects obtained paper 2 marks which were very slightly lower than what one might have expected from their paper 1 marks. And this value is so close to 0 that one can infer that the 175 suspects, and again I qualify the term suspects, performed as well as one might have expected, whether they had or did not have prior access to the leaked papers. We then look at the same patterns for physical sciences, and I'll go through these briefly, but here are the 4 years 2016 to 2019, and again it will be observed that the patterns are similar in each of the 4 years. There's no unexpected difference in each of those 4 years when compares the paper 2 and paper 1 performance of candidates in those years. What then was the case in 2020? This is the case in 2020, and in fact this is so similar to those of the previous 4 years as almost to be negligible. And the next graph shows the numbers, again remembering that each dot represents a candidate who outperformed in paper 2 relative to her or his performance in paper 1. And you'll see that the numbers in 2020 are significantly lower than some of the previous years. What those figures actually are is quite interesting, because in 2020 we have the smallest number of outliers in respect of the 5 years concerned. There was a high point in 2019, and the number in 2020 is only 59. That indicates that there is no concentration of outlier performers in respect of physical science, and does suggest that to the extent that there was a leak in the physical science paper 2, the impact is not visible from the statistical analysis. Of course, the statistical analysis on its own does not prove anything, but taken together with the other elements of our investigation is, I think, important. So the summary of the statistical analysis then: no evidence has been found of an unusual pattern. There is evidence that only 2 of the 175 suspect learners were in the upper standards residual for mathematics, category 3 and above. But there were another 203 in that outlier group. And further statistical analysis has shown clustering of the 205 with a standardized residual greater than 3 in a small number of schools in one geographical area. These schools in which there is this clustering had a mean school standardized residual of greater than 1. That attracts attention and means that we need to give further attention to it. So I'll come quickly to our conclusions and recommendations. And the headline conclusions and recommendations: given that the spread of the leaked questions was done via WhatsApp, the full extent of the leaks may not be uncovered. Any member of any group might have forwarded what she or he had seen
Your scan has been completed
to other people. That's possible. But on the evidence available at the moment from investigative marking and the statistical analysis and the interviews, widespread leaks do not seem to have occurred. And what we can say with confidence is that there's been no compromise to the integrity of the 2020 combined examination as a whole. And while the integrity of the mathematics paper 2 and physical sciences paper 2 has been marred, that was the statement I made early on, it has not been compromised overall. What does this lead to? Well, as I've said, neither investigative marking nor the statistical analysis on their own would be conclusive. But taken together and added to what we have to date from cell phone records and interviews, the absence of unusual patterns suggests strongly that widespread leaks did not occur. So we concluded that though 2 serious leaks occurred, the damage was limited to a very small number of learners in 2 papers in mathematics paper 2. What do we recommend about that? Well, first of all, we are clear that one of the key things for the future, not for the present, one of the key things for the future is that it is of the utmost importance that the case against the person accused of stealing papers from the one province's contracting printers office, that process be pursued to conclusion. And secondly, that the investigation into the leak related to the government printing works be finalised and the process be pursued to conclusion. It's only when that is done that we will be able to say what was the modus operandi, first of all, of the theft, and secondly, what was the modus operandi of the spreading from the theft to candidates. So that's an important one. Then we have made recommendations in respect of all the implicated candidates and how they should be managed. Now, there are 5 categories of what we refer to as implicated candidates. First of all, there are the candidates who are a recipient, and often probably an unwitting recipient, of the WhatsApp message concerned. And as I've said earlier, some of these did, and some of these may have opened those WhatsApp messages prior to the exam writing, but certainly some of them, and we don't know whether that's the majority, but it may well be the majority, did not do so. there are 236 such candidates. So these are unwitting recipients, and this group A excludes those in those WhatsApp groups whom we know to have been spreaders. In other words, people who sent the questions to the WhatsApp group, or having received them, sent them on to others knowing that they were exam questions. They're excluded from Group A. Secondly, there are the candidates where the statistical evidence suggests that performance in paper 2 relative to paper 1 makes him or her an outlier. And there are 205 such candidates, 2 of whom are in Group A, so they're excluded. Thirdly, then there are where a candidate is implicated in that he or she was sent a question paper by the WhatsApp group, and the statistical evidence suggests that performance in paper 2 relative makes him or her an outlier. Then Group D is where there is further evidence. In other words, where we know that the candidate was an initiator or spreader, or in some other way we have evidence of alleged wrongdoing on her or his part. And then the fifth group is that group of schools clustered in one particular geographical area where the standardized residual for paper 2 mathematics is unusually high for a school. In other words, where the mean standardized residual for the school as a whole is greater than 1, we think that that's a group worthy of identification. It was our job via the NEIC to make recommendations about these groups, and our recommendations in respect of these groups was that only in categories C and D, the results will be blocked pending further investigation. Our recommendation in respect of categories A and B, the results will be released pending further investigation, and in category E, the results will be released pending school investigation. It's important to note in this respect that should further investigation reveal that a candidate was in fact guilty of some wrongdoing, the Genfetco Act, which is the piece of legislation that governs Umalusi, the Genfetco Act provides that the council, that is the Council of Umalusi, may refuse to issue a certificate if a substantial irregularity has occurred in relation to any external assessment. It may cancel a certificate, and it may require an issued certificate to be returned. And of course, the process at this stage is that when results are released by the minister, candidates will get a statement of results. It will be later that a certificate is issued. So at this stage, the statement of results, which is not a certification document, is sent to candidates. So the certificates are issued later, but it's in this regard that the council may refuse to issue that certificate, or if it's already done so, that it may cancel it. We hope that the investigation will be complete in respect of all these groups prior to the actual issue of certificates by Umalusi. Then, of course, recommendation relating to system security. During the inspection of the government printing works, it was evident that the processes currently in use are susceptible to security breaches. And we recommend that an audit of these processes and protocols should be undertaken, and where necessary, changes be made to the protocols governing this printing. That is a recommendation for the future. And in parallel, once we have conclusion of the 2 cases which we know are underway, we hope to be able to establish modus operandi in both cases, and at that stage we will be able to look at that and take such remedial action as may be necessary. That brings me, Minister, to my last slide, which is to say the full report of the NITT with our recommendations. These were presented to Umalusi on Friday, the 12th of February. Umalusi will make its decision and will host, I understand, their official media briefing on the integrity of these public examinations tomorrow, Monday, the 15th of February. And of course, we now await the Umalusi announcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amor, for that detailed presentation. We really appreciate it. And we are glad that your network was able to stand for the entire duration of the presentation. Thank you so much to also Advocate Bono, who is part of this process, and we really appreciate the work that has been done. Colleagues, I'm now going to